Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm Fantasia. This is Sewing with Tay, and today we are doing a quick video of a hand knitted blanket. I want to thank y'all to my new subscribers. I'm hitting, getting close to 4,000, so I appreciate you guys. I am a sewist, and I like to do sewing things, sewing tutorials. I have a lot of things on my to-do list that I just have not been able to get to. My family does a yearly holiday picture, and I spent a couple weeks doing that, so I didn't film the process. I just did it, got it done with. So now I'm back to doing my YouTube videos. Well, my most popular videos are hand knitting, even though I am a sewist. So I learned how to hand knit earlier this year. It's a really fun project. It's super easy to do, very beginner friendly. I taught a girl last weekend how to do it, and she's made 2-3 blankets this week alone during this Thanksgiving time off. So I realized I did not have a video on my YouTube channel on how to make blankets. It's the same process as my cardigan videos that are very popular, but I like to teach a class and have a video that they can go back to, and I realized I didn't have that. So today we're going to do a video on hand knitted blankets. I had to do a voiceover. Is my camera going to die? Okay. I got a new vlogging camera because I was trying to be serious about my YouTubing and so many things. But either way, I'm on a charger. Okay, let's back to it. I like to have a video to go with some of my in-person classes so that you can have something to go back to. So this is what this is. So a little note was, speaking of cameras, I filmed this whole thing and realized once I sat down to get to editing, all that jazz, I realized I hit something on my camera that changed the frames per second of my video and put everything 2x slow-mo. So I'm redoing my intro. I was talking live during the hand knitting, but the sound got lost, so I'm not re-hand knitting the blanket. Well, I am. I'm going to do a different blanket, but that's for another day. I am going to voice over the rest of the video, so if you see my mouth moving, the words don't match, it's because I had to do a voiceover. But the important part that was in the intro, which I can't do a voiceover for because I think it'd be a little bit weird, is about the yarn. I am using Bernat Blanket Extra Thick yarn. I am a sewist, so I like to measure things in yards. That's not really what knitters do. I'm not a knitter. I've done machine knitting and I've taken knitting courses in college, but that was like 10 years ago. So knitting isn't my area of expertise. Fabrics, fabrications, things like that is. So when buying Bernat Blanket Extra Thick is what you want. This information here is important. So these ones come with 72 yards or 21.2 ounces. From my research, I've learned that knitters who buy yarn, a lot of it is based on ounces, not by yards. So this is 21.2 ounces or 72 yards. This is going to make a relatively small blanket. It's just a throw. For my classes, I just use 2 of these, but if you want to make a bigger blanket, I would buy 4 of these, whatever, that's your business. But the process is the same no matter if you're using 5 or 10 of these, so that doesn't matter. But I wanted to give you guys a close-up of this yarn. I will put links into my description below. It is Black Friday today. These here are $16 at Joann's currently. That's the cheapest that I've seen them. I've seen them like $20 usually, so I got a couple, so I'm going to be using these for a different one. So the blanket that I'm making today is actually this color, and my original video had me showing you this yarn, but I lost that video. So this is what the blanket looks like. It's not the yellow, it looks like this. But stay tuned, I'm going to be making that yellow blanket maybe tomorrow, we'll see. But yeah, so let's get into the video. It's super easy, super beginner friendly. If you ever want me to stop or like, hey, we need more detail here, leave me a comment and I will do my best to answer it for you. Let's get to knitting. Alright, so here is my yarn. I'm going to rip this open. You're going to find the tail of your yarn. It'll be tucked in the middle of your ball, so just pull some of the loose threads to get it out. Right there, you see it came right out. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll off some of the yarn so that we have a little area to work with. The first thing that we have to do is make a slip knot. So I'm going to try to show you this a couple ways because sometimes people get confused with this. We have our tail on this side. This side over here is our working yarn. It's the yarn that's connected to the ball. And we're going to remember that, our tail and our working yarn. So we're going to make a little loop just like that. And we're going to twist it. You want to twist it so the working yarn is at the back, just like this. And then we're going to pull the working yarn through the loop. So I'm trying to show you this a couple different ways. You're going to twist it so the working yarn's in the back, and then you're going to pull the working yarn through. I did it wrong here, so I didn't have a knot. So let me do it a different way. So I'm going to twist it, and there I'm going to pull the working yarn through the top. So the working yarn goes on the back. One more again. Here's the loop, twist it, and then twist it so it's in the back. Then you're going to pull that working yarn through the front to make a little slip knot. And you're going to pull the tail slash the working yarn to make it tighter. I'm going to show one more time. You have your loop, twist so the working yarn is in the back. Pull the working yarn up over right there. We're going to pull that towards the front. So twist it to the back, just like that. And then you're going to reach down, put your fingers through the loop, and pull the working yarn through. So you have a little slip knot like this. Your goal is to make your slip knot about 2 fingers wide. You don't want it to be super loose. This is going to set the tone for the tension and the width of your loops throughout the blanket. So this will be your loop number 1. We will count our loops for this blanket using 2 skeins of yarn. I'm going to make about 30 loops. You can do even 40 loops if you want to, but I'm doing 30 for this video. So you're going to take your fingers inside your loop. This is loop number 1. Fingers inside the loop, take your working yarn and pull it through to make a new loop. And then you're going to do that again. Fingers into the loop. Use those 2 fingers to pull the working yarn that's attached to the ball through the loop to make a new loop. So now we're at 3 loops, and you're going to keep doing this till you get to the amount of loops you want or to the length you want it to be. Each loop might not equate to 1 inch, or it might. It depends on how big your loops are. So I ended up with about 30 loops, and it ended up being about 29 inches. So it just depends on how tight or loose your loops are. So we're going to continue to do this until we get to our desired width. This is going to be the edge of your blanket. So you're going to take your loop and you're going to continue to grab your working yarn and pulling it through, making a new loop. Once you decide how many loops you're going to get, that's not the final answer until you get to row number 2. So if you're at 29 loops, but then when we get to the next step, you have more or less loops, it's okay. Don't worry about that. So I'm just going to keep looping. I'm going to continue to loop, make new loops until I get to my desired length. If you ever feel like your loop is too big, or you need to make it smaller, or you need to take it out, you can just pull your working yarn and it will pull out the loop. So that was my filler music. I will use that from time to time so that I'm not talking so much. So here I am measuring my base row. I like to do that for my own sanity, but you do not have to. You can just decide how many loops you want it to be. So I was kind of on the fence about the loops here. I felt like it was looking a little bit small. So I did decide I was going to go back and add a couple more loops just to make the blanket a little bit bigger. In hindsight, I had enough yarn, so it was okay. I did not run out with only using the two skeins of yarn. I ended up with about 35 loops once I got to the end of it. So once we get settled and you get to the end of your row, you're going to have one loop kind of hanging out here. That's going to be your last loop. This is my whole chain stitch that I used to start my blanket. So that is my last loop in this row. So I am going to start my second row. We're going to count this one as row number 1. The rows are not important in this because we're just making a square. If you were doing something more important where you needed to know how many rows, meaning they go left to right, you need, then you would want to keep track. But for the blanket, we're just going to knit till we run out. But now we are going to start on row number 2. So for row number 2, we're going to take our working yarn and we're going to go from the back of the loop, the part that's facing the camera here, and not the part that's facing me. I'm going to pull my working yarn through the back, making a new loop. I like to place my yarn in the direction that I'm knitting. So you see I pulled my yarn to the opposite direction because I'm going to be going that way. So I have my new loop number 1. You're going to take your working yarn and make a new loop by pulling it in between the space on that base row. So the base row where we made those loops, you're going to take your working yarn and you're going to pull it from the back towards you through each of those loops that we currently already have. So this is where counting your loops are important. Say you did 35 loops. Your goal at the end of this is to have 35 actual visible loops standing out on the edge for row number 2. So you will see me here. I kind of stick my finger in between the space of the loops from the base foundational row and I pull my yarn from the back towards me to make these loops that you see standing off. So we're going to continue that all the way until we get to the end. Be very careful. This fabric is fuzzy, so sometimes it's easy to miss where a loop was on that foundational row. If you miss a loop on the foundational row, it's okay. If you miss a loop on row number 10, not okay. So if you end up with 29 loops, but originally you had 30, it's okay. We just want to make sure that we have loops that are close to each other and that they are going all the same direction. You want to ensure you're always pulling your loop from the back through the loop towards you out the front. If you, for whatever reason, flip that around and you flip your yarn to be going down, like starting on your side of the blanket going towards the table, then your stitches get a little weird, and I'll show you that later. So it's important to make sure your loops are coming from the back towards the front, and I'm gonna see if I can zoom in to give you a little closer view. So here is a close-up. You see me pulling that working yarn, see me finding the hole, pushing that yarn from the bottom towards me, from the bottom towards me, making new loops. And these loops are the ones that are standing out from the edge of that foundational row. We're going to do that all the way till we get to the end to that first loop we started with, the slip knot. So I have a couple more here to go. You see, if you make your loops too tight, it becomes hard to pull your yarn through. So you want to make sure that all your loops are about 2 fingers wide so you can easily pull the yarn through to make new loops. Alright, I have made it to the end of my row and I'm going to go through here and I'm going to count my loops. From this point on, it is important that we keep consistent with the amount of loops. If you miss a loop, that means you're going to have a hole somewhere. So we want to make sure we are periodically checking the amount of loops we have in our row to make sure that we have the same amount of loops that we started with in row 2. So here I'm just going through. I did actually end up missing a loop somewhere, but I decided for the purposes of this video, it was fine. I'm just going to continue knitting. And if I had a big hole somewhere or a big gap somewhere, I would have tried to fix it. Like right there, you see it's a little space there, a little space there, but it's not that big of a deal to me. So now we're going to start with row 2. And here I'm just showing you an example, like if you ever felt the need to want to take out or you did skip one, you're like, oh, I want to go back and do this. You can just pull that tail pull the working yarn, pull the working yarn, and it will pull the loops out, and you can pull it out as far as you need to reset your loops. So now we are going to move on to row number 3. I'm going to pull my yarn the opposite direction, so it's going the direction that I am going to be knitting in. I'm going to start with the row at the end, and I'm basically going to continue to do this same thing. I'm going to make new loops by pulling my working yarn from the back of the blanket towards the front. Alright, in some parts of this video I will speed it up so you're not watching me do the same thing over and over again, but when I feel like you need to see something in real time, I will leave the speed as it should be. But you see here, we have those loops from our second row. We're making our third row. We're just going to take that working yarn, pull it from the back to the front. This part gets really easy, it gets really aimless, and we're going to do this for the next 50 rows. So literally nothing changes outside of this. You're going to make a new loop and continue to make new loops. So you take your working yarn, that is the yarn that is attached to your skein ball of yarn. So here I'm counting my loops to make sure that I'm not missing any, because at this point you want to stay consistent with the amount of loops that you have. So continue to pull your yarn. Here I kind of ran out of yarn. It was making the ball roll all over the place. So I pull some out, I move it into the direction that I'm going to be knitting in for ease, and then I'm just going to continue to make new loops by pulling it from the back to the front, from the back to the front. And you're going to do this all the way till you get to the opposite end, and then you're going to do this same thing again, going back the other direction. When you get to the end, you will always make a loop with the last loop, the same way you've done it all over, and then you're going to make a new first loop for the next row. So that was my last loop. That is my third row. Your blanket will curl up like this. That is normal. Like, it will kind of warp around. That is okay. It will even out as we get through the blanket making process. I'm counting my loops here to make sure that I'm not losing any, and then I'm going to move on to start row number 4. So I like to get a box and put my ball of yarn in it so it doesn't roll around the floor and around the table. I'm going to continue to knit this. I'm not going to knit it live. I'm going to speed it up a little so it's not an hour-long video. I got a glass of wine and some water, and I'm going to continue to knit this until I get to the end of this ball of yarn. So enjoy! Alright, we are a couple rows in and I want to show you. These are knit stitches. This is the part of the blanket that is facing you currently. These are purl stitches. This is the back. If you continue to knit the same direction, meaning that your yarn is coming from the back to the front towards you, it should have knit stitches on the front. If you make a mistake and flip it and start having your yarn go down towards the table, you will end up with purl stitches mixed in with your knit stitches. And ideally, you don't want that. Here's a picture of my ball of yarn in a box. Makes it easier for me. So just giving y'all some of my little tidbits. But I'm just going to keep on knitting. So here I am, maybe 15, 20 rows of knitting in, and I am at the end of my ball of yarn. So I'm going to show you how to combine them so that you can keep knitting. You can also use this process if you want to color block your blanket, if you want to mix the colors in. All you have to do is, cut your yarn wherever you want it to be, or if you're at the end of your yarn, you'll have a tail like this. You're going to take your new ball of yarn, you're going to take the new tail, you're going to tie them together in a knot. You want them to be pretty tight, you don't want them coming apart. And then you will take some scissors, which I did not have ready for me at the table, so I'm going to walk over here and get them. And then I'm just going to cut those extra ends off. Close to the knot as possible. You're going to need to get scissors because this yarn is thick. So once you get your new yarn attached, then you're just going to keep knitting as you've been doing this whole time. You're going to pull some yarn off, drop that skein into the box, or at least if you're using the box. Then we're just going to keep knitting, ensuring to pull your yarn from the back towards the front all the way until we get to the end of the blanket. So I'm going to hit the music again and we're going to keep knitting. One thing I want to add is that when my blanket gets too long, I like to flip it around so that the loops are closer to me. If you do this, you do want to ensure that you are still knitting the same way, meaning your loops are coming from the bottom to the top. So I like to flip it this way and then kind of roll the blanket towards me so that I don't have this huge blanket just kind of floating into nowhere land. So you'll see here the loops are now facing me and they're not away from me. Alright, I have made it to the last row of my blankets. You see I have it folded there. This is the end. I have about this much yarn left. I know that's real scientific, y'all. But what I like to do is the width of the blanket. I like to have at minimum 2, but maybe 2 to 3 widths of yarn left. So like making sure that it's long enough. We're about to do what's called casting off, which is finishing off the edge of the blanket, and you're going to need a little bit more yarn to do it. Alright, so I'm going to try to get this in frame for you, but I wanted to make sure it was close up because this can be a little confusing. I know when I was learning how to do this, this was the most difficult thing for me. So we're going to make a new loop like we've been doing, and you're going to take that loop and you're going to grab the loop next to it and pull it over. And then you're going to use your working yarn to make a new loop. That new loop is going to go over the loop next to it, and then working yarn creates new loop. Doing this, we create a chain that finishes off the edge so that it doesn't continue to pull out. So you're going to make a new loop every time, and then you're going to grab the loop next to it to pull it through, and you're going to continue this process all the way until you get to the end. I like to leave this part of the video real time so that you can see it because it took for me a couple times of watching someone else do this before I was able to figure out what was going on and master it. I don't know if y'all are like me, individual learners. So for this one, I had to really slow it down and watch what was happening. New loop, pull the next loop over, and then make a new loop. Pull it over the next loop, make a new loop. All right, we have made it to our last loop, my last loop right here. So you're going to take your working yarn that you just made a loop with, pull it over your last loop. So you have one loop here and you have your working yarn. You're going to pull that working yarn all the way through. All the way through. This is how much yarn I had left. I wouldn't have felt like this was enough to do another row, so I felt like we left enough yarn hanging. So what we're going to do to finish her off, and you're going to do this on the other side where we started and left the tail, we're going to give her a cut. We're going to cut her a couple inches away from the, the end. And then we are going to weave her in and out the cast off that we just created to hide her. So I'm going to move the blanket back in frame. And here we're going to just tuck our yarn in and out through this cast off we just created to wrap her up. And that pretty much, y'all, is the end of our blanket. You can continue this process with as many or as less amount of your skeins of yarn that you want to. That's your business. But yeah, our blanket is done. Well, here is my blanket. This is only using 2 of those 72 yards of yarn. It looks like this here. So it's just a little throw. If you want this to be a fuller size blanket, you could double it. But this is something a little cozy. I don't know, see if I can get a better full length video. Readjusted my camera. This is how long it is. So from my chest down to about my ankles. Can't see those. But this is the blanket. This is, see my knit stitches? Knit stitches on this side. And my purl stitches on this side. These make really cool Christmas gifts. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment for me, and I will do my best to help. There's a sale right now with Black Friday coming up, so you can get a lot of these for a lot cheaper than what they are traditionally. And 'tis the season for cozy blankets. But until next time, guys, bye!